I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and after 10 years, I finally managed to make a video that lands on Easter. Having made it here, there is something I'd like to say. Speaking as a Christian, I believe that there are certain passages of the Bible which are not meant to be interpreted literally, not even by Christians. These passages are known as parables. Had you going for a moment, didn't I?
Not really.
Well, you can't blame a guy for trying. Anyway, arguably the most famous parable told by Jesus during his earthly ministry was that of the prodigal son.
It's not hard to see why, since it presents the central idea of Christianity in a very succinct manner. The story's popularity has even extended well beyond religious circles. Consider how the term prodigal son has become a part of our lexicon as a way of describing wayward souls. In light of the parable's fame, I guess it's not too surprising that it was adapted into a biblical epic way back in 1955 entitled The Prodigal.
Ah, the biblical epic. They just don't make them like that anymore. Lavish sets, casts of thousands, big-name stars in the lead roles, and a real sense of reverence for the source material, whether or not the filmmakers even were believers. There's a sense of gravitas and respect in these films that just doesn't exist in modern cinema.
Sometimes they adapt events from the Bible itself, like the Ten Commandments or Jesus of Nazareth, and sometimes they go in a more apocryphal direction, like the Silver Chalice or Ben-Hur. What sets The Prodigal apart from the pack is that it's based on a parable, something that even the most fundamentalist of Christians agree is not a literal historical event, but a fictional story conveying a message.
This film, however, treats the story like an actual historical event, even going so far as to tell us it takes place in the year 70 BC and assign names to the previously nameless characters.
There's way more to it than that, Omni. In order to make it feature-length, they added a lot of details.
It starts off by taking time to introduce us to the main character, here named Micah, and show us that he's not necessarily a bad person. When we meet him at the start, he intervenes to save an escaped mute slave named Ashram, not hesitating to pay the small price for his freedom.
That isn't in the Bible, of course, but it was added to make Micah sympathetic, because how can anyone hate a guy who freed a slave he didn't even know?
At the same time, though, it provides our first glimpse of how loose he is with money, hinting at his eventual misfortune. We also get a glimpse of his home life and how he's already engaged to marry a beautiful woman named Ruth.
Frankly, Micah wants for nothing in life.
Indeed he does, which leads to another deviation. In the original parable, the prodigal son never says the reason he goes astray, other than the implication that he just wants to live his life the way he wants.
In the movie, Micah meets Narib, the high priest of the cult of Baal, from whom Ashram escaped. It seems they have a traveling caravan passing through town, and Narib wants Ashram back.
Why, you may ask? Well, it's implied later that he was a bit of a troublemaker who was already raising Cain against this particular cult, but it's never explicitly stated.
The more important thing is that this is when Micah first meets Samara, the high priestess of the cult, and is instantly smitten with how exotic she is.
Exotic? She's a blonde.
Yeah, a blonde in the Middle East where most people are usually dark-haired.
Okay, point made. Continue.
That I shall. Instantly, Micah is overcome with desire for Samara.
This is what motivates him to ask for his inheritance in advance, as it allows him to follow Samara to Damascus, where he buys a nice house and settles in as part of the community.
From there, the movie kind of lines up with the original parable again, at least for a little while, but we still see a major difference with the character of Micah.
During his time in Damascus, he's not really being that debaucherous, all things considered. In fact, he holds on to his Jewish traditions for a very long time, refusing to pay homage to the false gods around him and not shaving his beard. Yet the whole while, he's trying to win over Samara with no clear plan as to how, especially since she's so deeply devoted to her faith.
It seems like the only way this relationship will work is if one of them converts. And as the movie progresses, we see Micah slowly make more and more compromises to become like the people of Damascus. But the deviations don't end there.
In the original parable, the prodigal son's choices are entirely his own. Nobody forces him to waste his money on earthly desires. He just does it because he wants to. That's not really the case in the movie.
In fact, about midway through the film, Micah figures out on his own that he made a mistake leaving home, and he'd be better off getting out while he still can. This is well before he squandered everything, by the way.
He already learned his lesson while his head was still above water, which I'm sure has you all wondering, why doesn't he just leave then? Omni, care to answer?
Naturally. You see, Micah isn't the victim of his own foolishness in the film, at least not entirely. He's actually the victim of a conspiracy.
Narib is shown early on to be the true master of Damascus, and he's manipulating events in the city to keep the people oppressed and controllable. The famine that happens in the parable is not something that happens naturally, but is instead orchestrated by him. He also swears revenge on Micah for not only interfering with Ashram, but also for insulting him to his face. So, when Micah puts his house up for sale at a ridiculously low price, strings are pulled to prevent it from selling, thus keeping him in town so he can fall further from grace. And fall he does, as symbolized by the shaving of his beard.
Being a bearded man yourself, you would think that's a bridge too far.
Oh, it's not just me, Snazzy. Culturally speaking, having a beard was very important to Jewish people of the time, and removing your beard was considered a great shame indeed. In fact, Micah's removal of his beard precedes an even worse decision.
You see, Samara states early in the film that she will only be with Micah if he gives her the fabled Pearl of Solomon, which she would then give to her goddess. Micah resists on the grounds that he refuses to pay tribute to a false god, but he eventually can't resist his lust anymore, so he buys the pearl on credit without bothering to read the contract.
Gifting the pearl to Samara, who then gifts it to her goddess, finally gets Micah his one-night stand, but then he sours the moment by proposing marriage, which she immediately rejects.
After all, her goddess forbids her from belonging to any single man. She must be available to all men until she's no longer the high priestess.
That's how her religion works, you see. When she becomes old and undesirable, she'll be replaced by someone younger and prettier.
Are we sure this movie takes place in Damascus and not Hollywood?
I am about 80% sure it does, but that's the least of Micah's problems.
You see, while he was off playing hide-the-kosher pickle with Samara, his estate was burned and the rest of his inheritance stolen by bandits, or rather, hired hitmen. This leaves him destitute, and thanks to the fine print in the contract he didn't read because he was horny, the only way for him to pay his debt is to be sold into slavery to, who else? Narib, who makes sure he's treated horribly.
In the original parable, the prodigal son essentially becomes a slave after squandering all of his wealth and is forced to eat alongside pigs just to stay alive. This is the moment where he realizes how low he's sunk, and so he goes crawling back home, knowing that he does so in great shame, but also hoping that he'll be accepted back as a slave, or at least he'll know he'll be treated better. It is here that the movie takes the biggest deviation from the original story, and it has a direct effect on the moral.
First of all, Micah can't just leave because he's in chains, and being among slaves opens his eyes to their plight. He feels a moral obligation to do something about it, so he makes a plan and carries it out. After faking his death and fighting off the giant claw, he gathers the common folk and beggars together so they might rise up and overthrow this diabolical cult. This leads to an action-packed finale in which the bad guys get their just desserts and Micah gets to be a hero, after which he returns home and the rest of the movie plays out as written in the Bible. The father welcomes him with open arms, a celebration is held, the older brother is envious, but ultimately all is forgiven.
It had to end that way, of course, but this original ending doesn't line up with everything that came before it. Now don't get me wrong, this uprising sequence is very well done, but it ultimately undermines the point of the parable.
Remember, the parable makes it clear that the prodigal son has completely disgraced himself. He's squandered his wealth and his life, and he has nothing to justify his return home beyond offering himself as a slave. Yet despite this, he is welcomed back by his father anyway. More than that, his return is celebrated. The message is that no matter what you've done with your life, no matter how far you've fallen from grace, you are never beyond salvation.
In short, all it takes is sincere repentance, and the Father will welcome you home.
In the movie, however, Micah is basically atoning for his sins by taking action against the evil that surrounds him. Even if he's still penniless at the end, he has done something noble by freeing the slaves from the tyranny of a wicked cult, so he's got that accomplishment under his belt. Sure, he doesn't mention it when he returns home, but that's just him being humble about his achievements, which makes him look even better. It'll be quite a story to tell the kids he'll have with Ruth, who also forgives him very easily.
Do you see where the disconnect is? In the original parable, the prodigal son returns home having hit absolute rock bottom and knowing he's got no reason to justify being welcomed back, yet he is anyway. In the movie, Micah returns home a hero. That means the moral doesn't line up with the movie's plot. Not to mention it's kind of subverting doctrine, which is something you shouldn't really do when adapting the Bible, even if the part you're adapting is fictional in context.
Okay, so it's not sound doctrine, but does that make the movie bad?
Well, it's difficult to say, really.
Quality-wise, The Prodigal Son is no Ten Commandments, but it's still well made. That said, it's rarely a good thing when a movie, by accident or design, misses the point of the source material, especially if that point is supposed to be conveying a message that's considered so important by so many people the world over.
Those who I've shown the movie to generally land on that interpretation as well. It's an entertaining biblical epic, but don't go to it for doctrine. Read the book for that. And so I say Happy Easter to all, and until such time as next Easter comes, whatever day that happens to be, this is the Omni viewer signing off.
Here's a question for you. Since this biblical epic is based on a parable, would you call this the weirdest biblical epic you've ever seen?
Oh no, that honor goes to the movie where Hercules fights Samson. But we'll save that one for another day.
Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books, Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.